Almost from the establishment of Fort Presque Isle in 1753, the neighborhood around Lower Parade Street has been a kind of Ellis Island of Erie County, Pennsylvania, and it continues to fulfill that role to this day. With the use of pictures and anecdotes, our guest here, Ed Whitbred, will explore the role of this neighborhood's ethnic churches, businesses, and social organizations throughout Erie's history. These are interspersed with contemporary photos showing the same evolution with different cultural focuses. This is not a serious history, our presenter reminds us, but rather an informal reminder that other than Native Americans, we all come from strangers in a strange land. Hello and welcome to the Jefferson Educational Society's digital programming. I'm Ben Spagan. I'm the vice president at the Jefferson and am a contributing editor at the Erie Reader. Joining me in conversation is Ed Whitbred. Ed is, as he puts it, an Erie lifer. He grew up in the neighborhood that he will discuss. He attended Jones School, East High, and graduated from Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania and taught for 2 years at McDowell High School in Mill Creek. He then spent 35 years at Procter & Gamble, where he wore a number of hats, but was always paid by the sales department. For 18 years, he has been one of the hosts and producers of The Amazing Grays, a senior-oriented TV show produced by Community Access Media, CAM. As a lay worship leader in the Lutheran Church, he has been preaching and conducting services about once a month for more than a decade and is the program chairman for the Y Speaker series. Now, folks, programmatic note, since this is first airing live on the JES Facebook page, we're going to work our way through as many questions from you, the viewers, as we can as we host this event. If you have a question, just leave it in the comment section below. If you're watching or listening to a later broadcast of this program, please still feel free. Send us your questions, your comments. Keep that conversation going. Stay engaged here with this programming. And of course, for more information about upcoming JES programs and publications, do visit our website, jeserie.org, and be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Mr. Ed Whitbred, thank you for joining us for this discussion, this presentation.
It is a pleasure, Benjamin. I'm happy to be here. Before we start, I always thank Debbie Lyon, who writes a blog called Old Time Erie. A number of the photos that you see today are courtesy of her. She's very gracious about allowing us to use them. The other thing is a follow-up, if there are any serious history majors out there, be prepared to shriek in horror. Every time I do this, somebody comes up and says, you know, you didn't get that exactly right. I have no problem with that. We're kind of big picture here. Want me to start?
Yes, Ed, please go ahead and share your slide deck. And again, I appreciate that. Thanks to Debbie Lyon. We really do value the work that she does. Erie County Public Library, the work she does there, Old Time Erie as well. Such a valuable asset to our community. And we appreciate her sharing those with you and you sharing those with us today. So Ed, without further ado, take us away. Take us to Erie's Ellis Island.
Okay. We have heard more than we care to hear for the last couple of years about immigration, and we're not going to revisit a lot of that as we go through here today. John Adams once said, facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts or evidence, and what you said earlier is true. We are a nation of immigrants. That is not a feel-good tagline for a political speech. That is an absolute fact. What I hope to show in this is that immigration of the 1880s was in many ways a radically different experience than immigration today. And yet the problems of assimilation, of moving from one culture to another, of becoming part of one culture and leaving another behind, are pretty much exactly the same as they were then. And what struck me is that my old neighborhood played a role then and is playing virtually the same role now. It reminds me of the words of a great American philosopher, Yogi Berra, and I'm going to bring this up now. It's like deja vu all over again. Before we I want to move on into this and say, this is Erie, Pennsylvania, shortly after the Civil War. It's a map of 1870. You will see by at this point, State Street is already more or less the main drag. You'll see the building complexes that John Persinger is working on today. Some of them are still there. Perry Square was already there. Millionaires Row was beginning. Here is the old Erie Canal, which went down into Ohio. And basically, all of this was and State Street was really the only access to the bayfront at that point, and pretty much is now. But what we're going to do is move back about 50 years. And we're going to move over to Parade Street. And that is in this area. And if you, I'm not sure if excuse me for a moment, there's something I forgot to do when I was doing this. And we'll get down here and I'm going to pick up a pointer. Okay, that's what I should have done. The first Caucasians to come to this area were the French. The French built 4 forts, the first of which was Fort Presque Isle, which was in that area that I was showing you just a second ago. It would have been about right here. They also built a fort in Fort LeBoeuf, now is Waterford, one in Franklin, Pennsylvania, and then again Fort Duquesne in Pittsburgh. Around Fort Presque Isle, 200 or 300 settlers took up camp. In time, Fort Presque Isle didn't amount to a whole lot. It managed to burn itself to the ground a couple of times. And other than that, eventually it moved on. But the settlers stayed, and the settlers started from that area right in that vicinity. So what I'd like to do is have you introduced to Hans. Hans is probably in his mid-20s at the most. He's from a Roman Catholic family in Germany. They have been village butchers for 3 generations. He is the third of 4 brothers, of 4 brothers. He's the only one that's not married. He has 3 sisters, 2 of which are not married. They're all having kids. And recently his father died and his oldest brother became leader of the company, the butcher shop, so to speak, which is the way it is and the way it should be, except his older brother's kind of a dummkopf and maybe wants his lager a little too often. Hans has seen the writing on the wall, has taken his share of the family fortune and gone to America. Some way or other, he found himself to Erie, Pennsylvania. And the slide that you're looking at next to him is from 7th and Parade Street. Obviously, it wasn't in 1756 or 1810, trolley cars and the other. But this is where he'd be looking. He came probably by boat. He's got a duffel bag or a seaman's bag of some sort. In it, he might have a little bit of clothing. Being a butcher, probably some good German knives, maybe a Bible, whatever money he might have. And as he's standing there looking down there, he's got 3 things on his mind. 1, where can I get a good meal? Secondly, where am I going to stay tonight? Third, how do I go about finding a job? But overriding all of those 3 things is one critical thing. Where in the world do I find somebody who speaks German? And fortunately for Hans, he is not the first German Catholic to come into the area. He is now standing roughly, here's Perry Square, he is standing roughly at 7th and Parade. About 1800, a group of German Catholics followed the same path, found themselves in the same place, went further down to what is now East 9th Street, turned on a path into the woods, literally a path into the woods, because there was land available in this area here. Uh, that's where the German Catholic community settled initially. And that street now, you might not be surprised to find out, is called German Street. Hans stopped here, right at this point, because at that point, this is what he found. This is St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church. It is obviously not early 1800 because there are telegraph poles there, and it's not really a good, good depiction of it. It was called St. Mary's, Mother of Christ. And here is probably a more realistic picture of what Hans ran into, and it might not even have been that big at that point. But what did this do for him? When Hans walked through the door, to begin with, if he wanted to worship, he would find the Roman Catholic Mass in Latin exactly the same way as it was back home. So there is that sense of comfort. He's worshiping among people that he is comfortable with. But beyond that, while the services are done in Latin, virtually everything else at St. Mary's at that time was done in German. If there was a homily, it was done in German. Readings were in German. You went to confession in German. Any of the church activities, the announcements, the bulletins would be in his language. So he's, in a sense, found more than a worship home. He's found another home. He also got from it. People would come up to him. Hans, I understand you're looking for work. I don't know a position as a butcher, but Rolf over there is building a lot of houses. And Rolf, always has room for one more carpenter if you can swing a hammer. And you probably need a place to stay. And my Aunt Hilda has a boarding house, and it's clean and it's well kept. And I know she has a room available, and she makes a mean schnitzel. So I'll take you over there. The lovely lady in the corner in her 50s has 2 daughters about your age. And sometime soon, you really do need to get married and settle down. So within a week or two of Hans arriving, he has a real estate agent. He has Match.com for him, and he's got somebody who's looking out for his job. That's what the churches in that area did. Now, this is what the church looks like today. This is New Life and Spirit Center. Pastor Curtis Brown bought this a couple of years ago, and they're doing well there. But Hans is not going to spend his whole life in church, especially after he gets settled in. He's going to be looking for a place where they might have music that he's familiar with, where there might be cooking, meals, a cuisine that he's familiar with, where there might be some women that are not looking to get married, but someplace down the road might. This is East Erie Turners. Anybody who's been around for a long time, feels the same sense of sadness that I do, that it's all boarded up. But this is the best picture that I could find about it. All of these, I'm going to go back for just a second. All of these essentially started as a singing group. All of them had bands. And when I say all of them, I'm referring to all of the ethnic social centers in this area. Virtually every not congregation, but every denomination, everyone had one of these. I'm looking for immigration, and that's what I'm going. Each group of immigrants would have this. I learn something every time I do this, and this is my latest learning. Somebody come up and told me what a turner was. Turners are a group of men who were primarily oriented to police work and military, but organized gymnastic teams. It was a really big thing, both in the Germany of that period. I think it still is in some areas. These pictures were taken in Milwaukee. The Turners provided protection for Abraham Lincoln when he was going to his inauguration. And they also provided protection for the casket when he was brought back to Illinois after his assassination. Interesting thing. In about 1840, a group of German Benedictine nuns were sent to a small town in Pennsylvania called St. Mary's. It apparently didn't take long to straighten St. Mary's out, because about 7 years later, they sent 7 or 8 of them to Erie, Pennsylvania, to work in conjunction with St. Mary's congregation. They have never left the neighborhood. Through all of the transition, they are still there. Their impact, here is the essence of assimilation. This is the generation that they taught, that came to first grade speaking only German. And by the time they graduated, were speaking English here and German at home. This assimilation of culture generally does not happen in a 5 or 10 year period. It happens in a period of, at least 1 generation, and quite often 2 or 3. I worked in an Italian grocery in high school and college, and upstairs was the mother of the owner, who had been in this country for at least 30 years and still spoke almost no English, but made herself known besides that. Another picture, in the nuns in all of this area, and I need to say that I'm going to be leaning heavily on Catholicism in this presentation. That is not to say that there were not other organizations, other denominations doing exactly the same thing. But this is the neighborhood that I grew up in, and this is what I know. And it is really difficult to underestimate the impact that the various nuns had on this area. I'm going to go back. St. Benedict's Academy was the first all-girls high school in this area. It ran for almost 100 years before it went the way of all private schools, or not all private schools, but many private schools. But as you'll see later, it's still being used. It's still playing at pace in the neighborhood. Another group of, I'm going to go back there for a second. What I'm going to do now is quickly go through a number of other congregations. St. Patrick's was one of the second to the block. It is primarily known as an Irish-based congregation, and it primarily is. On the other hand, there is a significant Italian presence in that neighborhood, and they have always been a strong influence on this particular congregation. I failed to mention that at one presentation and heard about it in a hurry. This is St. Patrick's today. It's a beautiful church. I mean, they've been well maintained. This is one that has not gone away. Unfortunately, some of the ones that I'm showing you will not be in that area. Second, just north of St. Patrick's by 2 or 3 blocks, the Russian contingent showed up in the late 1800s and early 1900s. This is probably one of the most photographed churches in the area. This is the Church of the Nativity. It is Russian Orthodox. It stands right on the bayfront overlooking Presque Isle. If you're on the dock, you can take a picture of it. If you're at the library, you can take a picture of it. It is just a gorgeous piece of architecture, both on the outside and the inside. This is a wedding ceremony that took place during that period, not that period, took place, I don't know when. And you see the icons that are the heart and soul of the Orthodox approach to Christianity. Now, before you run out and look for an application, you need to know, you'll notice that everybody there is standing. It is not simply because of the wedding. If you go to an Orthodox service, you are expected to stand through all 2.5 hours of it, unless you physically cannot. You might bear that in mind. St. Hedwig's on East 3rd Street, I do not believe is any longer in existence. The building is there, but I don't believe it's active. You get some impression of how active they were in the other picture on that slide. St. Casimir, which is further east, out past East Avenue, is still active, I believe. You see the interior there, and you see a group of a different order of nuns that, again, were the backbone of most of these church schools, and for that reason, for the backbone of most of the assimilation that I'm talking about. Swedish showed up, Scandinavian. They loved their winter, so they settled in Erie, Pennsylvania, and this is Bethany Lutheran, and it was a Swedish congregation for a long, long time. And this is right across the street from St. Mary's. Again, it went through the process of teaching Sunday school in Swedish, of doing everything in Swedish, and eventually helping with the assimilation into the culture. St. Nicholas, Greek Catholic, part of the American Carpatho-Russian Orthodox Diocese. East Avenue, one of my best friends was married here. Again, you see the icons of the Orthodox approach to Christianity. They're a little less disciplined, I guess is the term. They allow you to sit down during parts of their services. They actually provide pews to sit in. Again, a beautiful church still in existence. Holy Trinity Church of the Old Believers. This is right around the corner from the other Russian church. This is very small. It is still in existence. They still follow the old Orthodox liturgies. This picture was taken on Father Lawrence Evanoff's 103rd birthday. Father Lawrence unfortunately passed on a year or so ago. He was 105 at the time, was still doing the services, standing through everything, a life well lived. But again, a different kind of Christianity that is part of us. When I show this and I ask people, anybody recognize it? I have as yet to find somebody who does. But when you go to the next one, everybody does. St. Stan's, the heart of Polish Catholicism in Erie, Pennsylvania. The church as it stands now, the school building, and the interior of the church. This was a neighborhood that I spent much time in. A close friend lived right across the street from it. We've been to lots of dinners there, both at our friend's house and at the another one of the social agencies, the social societies, again, starting pretty much as a social singing agency or music fairly, but this is the Police Falcons. If you think of the Knights of Columbus in the Italian tradition, same type of thing. And if you've never actually seen a Police Falcon, I mean a real live Police Falcon, this is the uniform of the day down in the left-hand corner. This building is still, folks are still there, and it's still very active and still very politically oriented. One of the things that all of these societies, all of these ethnic clubs became were an integral part of politics on the east side of Erie. There was not a politician that would ignore them. Here are some of these 35 defunct Erie clubs. And I put this up here because I've shown you a couple that are still there. Most of these have gone by the boards simply because people have moved to the suburbs. People have assimilated into It's no longer referring to themselves as Italian Americans, but simply as Americans. Uh, so that, this is the impact on that whole world. Now we're just going to get less serious and maybe take a walk up Parade Street. This is the area that I grew up in. This is a gas station that has always, for my knowledge, sold gas at the corner of 6th and Parade Street. It would be the southeast corner. There is a gas station there now and a convenience store. I suspect the prices are a little bit higher. When you look at Parade Street, you would find that from the dock to 6th Street, where this station is primarily residential. It was then, it still is. And at 6th Street, then it turns to commercial. I put this apartment house in because, to my knowledge, it's really the only actual apartment house between here and about 26th Street on Parade Street. There were tons of apartments, but most of them were up over other operations. There would be retail on the ground floor, some kind of a shop or company, and then living quarters or rental property above them. So I put this in. For people who've been around Erie, if you were to go just across the street going north, you would have the original Auburn Florists, but I couldn't find a picture of them, so I put that on there. This is a 5 and 10 cent store, and this picture was probably taken, I'm guessing, sometime in the mid-1800s. There is another picture that I'm going to show here. This is the same place, and the buildings in the last picture are shown here. They've been colorized, and another structure has popped up beside them. But other than that, if you look at the way the buildings are, it's pretty much the same. Surprisingly, they're still there. The two old buildings are now part of this, the original there. This is Kraus Department Store. This building has been there as a private company for well over 100 years. It is not a museum. It is prosperous. It grows. If you have never been at the Kraus Department Store, for heaven's sakes, get down there. Their motto is, if we don't have it, you don't need it. And that's probably pretty close to the truth. This is, and I'm going to have to find something here. I'm going to move this up. This is one of their ads from this period. And the electric department is what I'm looking at, because they had a huge one. And they had just wall after wall of lamps and lampshades. They had china, pottery, they had everything. You can rent plows and tractors in there now. But they still have walls and walls of electric lamps. I don't think they cost $1 or $2 anymore. But this is a picture taken a couple of years ago. This is a real live operation. We're now at 10th and State, and this is a schematic that was done in 1923. And I'm showing it for primarily the Parade Street Market. Now, Erie at that point had at least 3 major markets. There was a central market over near where the Central Mall was. There was one on 12th Street, and there was one at 10th and Parade. I remember going to this one. No, I take it back. It's the next part that I remember. This would have had about any place from 60 to 80 stalls at any point in time. This would be what they might look like, AA Scolio. Now, I'm not sure which one of those markets this came from, but it's interesting that Scolio family is still selling fancy fruits at 32nd and Cherry Street. I don't know if they have any second or third locations, but this is a list of, here's Anscolio Produce, Potraz, Del Porto Fruits and Vegetable, Tillman Florist. These are names that are still around today that were part of that marketplace. And I'm guessing that if you put married names and followed the ancestry, there are probably a lot more of these that are still kicking around. Um, but everything runs its course, and eventually that piece of property was taken over by Loblaws. Not by this particular Loblaws. You're looking at one of their smaller stores. The Loblaw that was there was probably one of Erie's first, quote, supermarkets. Uh, not by our standards, but by theirs. And I remember going to this with my mother. We would walk from 6th and Holland up to this area and take a cab home, and that was a big deal. And I can remember, and I believe that they built their building on the original cement floor that was there from the market, because the noise of the all metal carts rolling around that cement floor was deafening at times. But they were there for a long, long time, and I believe finally burned down. When they burnt down, there was a gas station that was in there for a period of time, and it was thought that people really couldn't handle that. It wasn't a good place to put in a business to start from the ground up, until a company called Denny's Ice Cream Stand started selling soft serve out of there. They did this in the 80s. Since then, they've put in a car wash, and they have a laundromat behind it. You can go in there, and these places are pristine, and they're doing business, and they're a block and a half away from Kraus's, which is also pristine, and some other places that, prove that, business is alive and well on Parade Street. It gets sketchy on occasion, but it's still there. One of my favorite hidden pleasures, guilty pleasures, is you can't really see it, but this was the picture I could find of the original New York lunch. 1005 Parade Street, established 1925. In about 3.5 years, they're going to start celebrating or 4.5 years, they'll start celebrating their 100th anniversary. Think of the number of big restaurants, expensive restaurants, popular restaurants that have come and gone since 1925. Parade Street's kind of like that. Brought it back here to look at the Wilkey Theater, which at that time would have been a first-run theater, and then a second-run theater, and then it showed cowboy movies only. And then it became one of the original Regent theaters, the Naughty Theater in Erie area. I suspect what they were showing under that banner would be mild stuff on streaming television now, but it was quite risque in that period. Wolf's Department Store, 13th and Parade, also owned the surplus stores in Erie. This used to be the Police Veterans of America, the PBA club. It became Latinos for 15 years and sold wonderful Hispanic meals. Julio Reyes eventually sold it, and he bought the Manicure Club, and now I believe there is a Bhutanese restaurant in there that I hope is still there when this pandemic ends, because I'd love to give it a try. Arthur F. Schultz, when they were selling candy and tobaccos. You'll notice this one is cash and carry, and you'll notice the number of trucks that they have for delivery, which gives you some idea of their volume of business. This is somewhere on Parade Street, and there probably were a dozen of them between 6th and 26th Street. There was one across the street from Latinos called Kuklinski's that I remember being in at least once or twice. They served Wayne Brewing Company beer, draft beer in a stubby bottle that could fit in the refrigerator without having to rearrange the shelves. Half the East Side at some point or another took music lessons at Osiki's near 24th and Parade. They had another one in Corey. This is now a Islamic cultural center. The Osiki brothers, quite frankly, were legends in Erie for a long, long time, both for their teaching and for the number of bands that they played in. This is something that you'll see 3 or 4 places on Parade Street now, and that is Markets, Mideastern markets that advertise halal meats. And if you're not familiar with halal, think kosher meats for the Jewish. It is a tradition, it is a part of their spiritual life that if you're very strict in Muslim doctrine, then you will eat only halal approved meats. You will find those in a dozen places in Erie, and some of them fairly big at this point in time. Phillips Fruit Company, Old Time Erie. Nickel Plates Railroad is still there. This is one of their old flyers. I don't know what the prices were, but I suspect they're more now. Mighty Fine Donuts threw away the keys a long time ago. They're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you get the munchies at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's a place to head to. Another contribution by Greek Americans, Palacos Chocolates, legendary in Erie, Pennsylvania. They are still alive and well at 26 and Parade. I've never heard of Marvintown Bowling and Billiard Academy, but I put this in because of the term Marvintown. If you start at 28th and Parade and kind of draw a circle about half a mile around, this was Marvintown to a lot of people. It was a kind of German community at the point. And at that point, I'm going to switch back and talk a little bit more about immigration as it is today. Numbers are not nearly as high. We talk a lot about immigration in the area, but compared to the 1800s, the numbers are not that high. They are more apt to be refugees from trouble spots in Asia, Africa, and Mideast, rather than European. People in the 1800s came here because they sensed a new life that they couldn't, they could prosper in. People today quite often show up because it was a way to stay alive. They are literally be coming in to save their lives. They no longer show up in a boat or even that often on a train, but more likely at an airport or a transportation terminal. They are drawn to the neighborhood of disgust by inexpensive housing and because of availability of assimilation services. And it would seem that they are totally different, but in many ways, the same thing is going on. The Benedictines who have been here since then run a community center, a child development center, an art house, a Emmaus soup kitchen, Sister Gus's Kids Cafe, and the Brettonwood Apartments, which are in Harbor Creek, and my cousin lives in. Instead of having 10th graders, 10th grade girls, it now has English as a first and second language. It now has job skills taught by, again, the Benedictines, a couple of art house, food pantry. Bethany Outreach Center in the old Lutheran church, Bethany Lutheran Church, is now a outreach center. They do food banks, they do clothing distribution. Multicultural Center is right down the street, a couple blocks away. Multicultural Center, go in this building and it's one of the liveliest buildings you'll ever walk into. And they started as the American Hispanic Council, which had their location in the Diocese of Erie offices. SafeNet, I was on their board for 10 years. They were started by Erie Women's Religious United, I forget, I can't get it right, but it was Jewish, Protestant, and Catholic women. Saw a problem and decided to solve it. St. Martin's, I believe, is still part of the Catholic Diocese. International Institute is neither government or religious oriented. It is a 501(c)(3). It is kind of a traffic cop for relocating refugees. Most of our refugees have been sent to and cared for by Erie Institute. They do a certain amount of programming up there. They're very well in. This is one of my favorite pictures on it, and this is taken at their campus up there. There are still churches that are functioning the way that we described earlier in Carriage Hill. Grace Slavic, San Juan United Presbyterian or Methodist, I'm sorry, still, servicing the Hispanic community, still providing the same type of thing. And here is a Bhutanese worship service. This is taking part in the Neighborhood Partnership Center, which is the old Bethany Lutheran Church. This is a worship center, and you could hit a 9-iron from this spot to where Hans walked into St. Mary's Church for the first time. Same neighborhood, literally that close together. And you can imagine at the end of the service, somebody saying, a new apartment opened up on the block you might want to look at. Or we just opened a restaurant where Latinos used to be and maybe there's a job there. Or you need to have dinner with my cousin. I've already arranged for it. It's doing exactly the same thing that it did before. It is a religious-based experience. Scheller and Weber, I just like this picture, so I put it in. Thought it was a good picture of a German. This could be Hans 15 years later, except the picture was taken in New York City. But it does have an Erie connection. Weber, some of these Weber meat markets are still in existence in New York, but Mr. Weber got tired of that business. He wanted to be in the warehouse end of the business, the production end, so he looked for a place to buy, and he bought a meat packing company from a gentleman named Ed Smith in Erie, Pennsylvania in the late 40s, and that's where Smith Provisions come from, which are now one of the fastest rising hot dogs in Pittsburgh. Finally, Herman's Cafe, institutional. It ought to be on the register, the national register. It's at 28th and Parade. It is now vacant. It was a biker's bar before that, but back in the day, it was the quintessential German tavern. What other restaurant in Erie could you walk into and find one of the 20th century's greatest symphonic conductors sitting at the end of the bar, having a schnapps with a lager back, or perhaps eating Hassenpfeffer and Spätzle, or if he's in a really adventurous mood, Limburger and onion and cheese and mustard on rye bread. Frankly, the motorcycle fumes at that point were probably an improvement. And they would wash them down with cola beer, free Rhine booze. Take the cola beer, the German, and you put a stein in one hand and Brought in the other hand and start dancing with the alpine hat and the shorts and the long white stockings. You have an Oktoberfest. Erie's Oktoberfest comes full circle for me because it's a celebration of the German culture, music. Germans are still the largest ethnic group in Erie, Pennsylvania. But it takes place every year in a pavilion that is owned by a Greek Orthodox church located on the east side, on East Avenue. And its address is 5153 Old French Road. So that you've come full circle. Old French Road, if you drive up past the Veterans Administration Hospital, you are traveling on the oldest path in Erie County. As you go past that to get to this, you're in the original path to Waterford. So it's like deja vu all over again. Hey, why don't I close this off? And we're back looking at each other.
We are, and Ed, thank you, and thank you all who've tuned in, watching live, and thank you all who might be watching this streaming on demand, a later broadcast, or listening to it. We've got folks in the audience paying great attention. But Ed, thank you, thank you, thank you. That's a lot to get through in a short amount of time. No easy task. Clearly, a lot has gone into that, and I've got to ask you again, just to walk us through what got you initially interested in researching this and then compiling it and putting the whole slide deck together and taking us on the journey through Parade Street? What piqued your interest to begin with?
Well, to start with, I grew up there. I mean, that's my neighborhood. Um,
But not everybody researches their
yeah.
neighborhood like this and dives in, Ed. This is something special. So what spoke to you to put this together?
For about 10 years, I was on the board of directors of SafeNet, which is located in that neighborhood. As a matter of fact, it is right next door to Bethany Outreach Center, which is the original Bethany Lutheran Church. When I left SafeNet, I was on their board for about 4 years. They had a fundraiser that involved touring the neighborhood, and I volunteered to take charge of that. And of course, for the first 2 years that I did that, it poured on each of those days when we were going to tour the neighborhood. So the first year, I literally threw together about 40 slides, grabbing them off of Google Images, and showed them just, to have a little bit of fun and, kill 20 minutes. It rained again next year, and I was a little more structured, I guess you could say. I began to see a theme in it. And I began through working both with SafeNet and with the Bethany Outreach Center to see just how active they were and the Benedictines were with the immigrant experience that was very much a part of that neighborhood, that at points almost overwhelmed that neighborhood. And I talk a lot when I go to places, and I was offered, somebody saw it at the second time around and said, could you come here? And I did that. And I've been doing it periodically. Haven't done it for a couple of years, and I think it showed a little bit when I talked today.
No, folks, you had folks' attention, Ed. I think they really paid attention, and one's asking a follow-up question here, so I'm going to take this right from the audience chat. They're looking particularly in that portion of the social clubs, and I had a question for you too about that. Wondering what may have replaced them in their function. But this person's asking because they noticed. Could anything be said about the Lithuanian immigrants? They saw that this observer saw they had a defunct club. Is there anything that you've come across in your research that you might know, or is this the next Erie Turners for you? We're setting you on a new path to learn something new for this presentation.
I always tell at the question and answer period, I reserve the right to say 4 words. I have no idea. I know the Lithuanian club was there. As a matter of fact, in high school, I used to deliver milk to the Lithuanian Club for Bourne's Dairy Company. Now that's going back a long time, but I'm not familiar with it, and I do not know the background. I know that social clubs have gone by the boards because they were needed at the time. And quite frankly, neither the business model nor the heartfelt need for them is still there, because people are assimilated from one culture to another. They have been Lithuanian, and then their kids are sort of Lithuanian, and then their kids grow up and they're not Lithuanian. They may still speak a little bit of the language, but by that point, they're pretty much Americanized. And they've maybe gone up the ladder a little bit, and they're getting ready to move to Harbor Creek, or they'll get a job in New York City, or go to the coast. Everybody's going to Los Angeles. And that is where most of the old social clubs have gone. I was part of the Manticore for a long, long time. I sang there. And it just, sometimes it breaks your heart when these places close up, but at the same time, there's no good reason for them to be there any longer.
And
if there were, they would. I mean, if there were enough Lithuanians keeping that place going, it would still be there. And there are still some
I was gonna ask you that, Ed. What does Erie's Lithuanian population look like? If you have any knowledge of that, and then
Yeah,
I think another one would be, where was the club since you delivered milk to it? Tell us a little bit
it was
about
on
the club
Parade Street. It was on
experience.
Parade Street, I believe, if it's the one I'm thinking of. And I want to say something like 913 or 9 something in that area. But it was not a large operation as I remember, but it was there. Or am I thinking of across the street from the old Parade Street Tavern? There were so many of those things, and in the days that I was traveling through them, I probably wasn't looking at the front door as I went in. But I'll find out. I'll tell you, if I do this thing again, I'll know where the Lithuanians were, and I'll have an answer to that.
So I
And if
was gonna,
somebody wants to send send you the question, you forward it to me, I'll find out.
I will, and I was going to say, folks, tune in for when we do this again. And I think that's another place to follow up. You mentioned earlier in the presentation you had not known what a Turner was and went in and looked up the Erie Turners, and you say you're finding something new every time you do this. I think for some folks, that can be intimidating. To go out and speak and say, I know this, and I know there are areas I don't know, but I still want to share this, and I want to learn along the way and be an active learner in the teaching process because you taught us plenty, Ed. How do you work through that of this fun experience of learning something new every time you're giving this presentation? Does it seem overwhelming at all or exhausting ever?
I have one of the things I did for a long time was sell, and God bless Procter and Gamble. They taught me how to organize material. I mean, because when quite often you would have maybe a minute, minute and a half with somebody, and you had to know how to structure it. And if somebody from P&G were watching that, they would see parts of what I was doing being around that. And I'm perfectly happy to share that with folks, but it would take a while here. But part of it is simply learn skills. There's no magic to it. If you have a passion for something, you simply decide, what do I want to tell people, and go from there. You don't start and work from the facts up. You start with, what do I want to do? What do I know that might be of value to somebody else? And from that point, how do I do it in an amount of time that people will be willing to sit through? And how do I use technology? Much of this also came from working at community access media. If somebody is really serious about trying to do something like this, boy, that's the best bargain in this area. You can get on there and you can work with $2 or $3 million worth of equipment for the cost of a decent meal in any restaurant in Erie. I mean, and Jake Barco and their group are just wonderful people.
I,
So if you're serious, get on and see what kind of fun you can have.
And
They'll teach you.
I'm glad you brought up Jacob's name. They do a great service for the community. Wonderful folks down there. So would point people in that direction and appreciate all you do with them. Ed, we're almost out of time. I'm going to ask one final question, and then already we're going to line you up for another presentation. We can bring you back to find out more about the Lithuanians and anything else that we've missed as you continue to learn along the way. But folks who have seen this and you've done this presentation before, and folks like to come back again and again. But for those that return to see it more than once and those seeing it for the first time, the bigger picture, if folks were to take away, viewers were to take away one thing from today's presentation, two maybe, what is it that you hope that they hold on to from looking at Lower Parade Street, Erie's Ellis Island? What do you hope they take away, Ed?
I would get back to John Adams. Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts or evidence. All of us have inclinations, dictates of our wishes, or the dictates of our passions. And if we come to understand that, we are flawed sometimes as we look at other people, and we sometimes tend to judge them, based on the way I was brought up, the people I was around. It's not saying they're any better or worse. Somebody mentioned this to me one time. that they went to East High when I did, and their brother went to Cathedral Prep. And what they were exposed to relative to their brother was so radically different in terms of the types of people that they dealt with, the diversity of people that they dealt, and that's not a condemnation of either one. It's simply a John Adams fact that, you know, wherever you were growing up when you formed your passions, you don't know everything. And there's always something to learn about the other side of the track. Uh, it's one of the great myths is that immigration has been easy, that what people are experiencing now that are coming to this country is difficult relative to when they came as a German or an Italian. That is simply not the truth. And anybody who reads even a little bit of history or looks at some of the Ken Burns material, you'll find out that when the Italians come here, they had just as many problems. When the Polish came here, they came with just as much baggage. When the Chinese came, and what we haven't talked about, because I'm not qualified to do it, is when the African Americans were brought here not as somebody looking for a new life, but as essentially farm equipment, as possessions that had no chance of going anywhere. They would live and die in a life that they didn't choose and wasn't very pleasant. Somebody like Johnny Johnson can, you know, shed light on that. I know you've had him in the past, and he's an incredible intellect. So that kind of thing, just understand that just because I feel it in my gut doesn't mean it's real. So sometimes we're a product of what we've grown up around. And probably the most difficult thing is to get past that sometimes. And that's probably more than you wanted.
No, Ed, I think that's a poignant and powerful and important note for us to end this conversation on. I'm going to echo one of the comments here in the comment section on the Facebook post live that says, thanks, Ed, informative and enjoyable. I share that. Mr. Ed Whitbred, Erie native, Erie lifer, a fun historian walking us through Parade Street. The host and producer of The Amazing Grays on CAM. I want to point folks to that again. Ed, thank you for taking the time, energy, and effort to do this presentation with us.
Take care.
All right, and thank you, folks, everyone who tuned in live, anybody who streamed this afterwards. We appreciate you, whether you're streaming on demand or tuning in live to this programming. These programs don't happen without you, the audience, and for that, we are grateful for your attentiveness and your attention. Folks, for more information about both upcoming programs as well as past discussions now available to stream on demand, head over to our website, jeserie.org. There you're also going to find a wide range of publications from timely reads on current topics to reports, essays, and more. And of course, be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For the Jefferson Educational Society, I'm Ben Spagan. Be safe, be sound, and thanks for listening and learning with us.